Well, welcome again to another Friday night, and we're working on a series right now that looks at what does healing from complex trauma look like. And we're looking at it from the perspective that it's all about reparenting ourselves. So tonight I want to come to the reality that in parenting you need to be very encouraging. A child, in order to grow up healthy, needs large doses of encouragement. And people in recovery who are reparenting themselves need large doses of encouragement. I found it very interesting this week to come across some research that says for every negative event that a child goes through, they need at least 20 positive events to balance out that one negative event. And that shows you just how sensitive a child is to negative and how they need these large doses of positive. So let me begin by defining what I mean when I talk about encouragement. It's more than just praising people for doing a good job. That we would refer to as validation. And it can be very encouraging, but that's not the entirety of encouragement. So encouragement means to pour courage into somebody. So it's a picture of somebody that is struggling, somebody that feels like giving up. They're losing strength. They're losing the will to continue going. And you come alongside of them and you pour strength and courage into them so that they keep going. I found it very interesting to think of encouragement in light of the limbic brain versus the cortex. Many of us, when we think of encouragement, we think of working on the limbic brain to get it feeling better, to get it encouraged in a positive place. But the idea really is you pour courage into somebody in their cortex so that they have the will to continue, even though they don't feel better right away. But you know that if they keep going, eventually it will affect their limbic brain and they will start to feel positive. So encouragement starts by getting the cortex to a place where it chooses to keep going. So you pour that courage and strength into somebody. It affects their cortex first. They choose to continue, and then it gradually begins to affect their limbic brain. I think the danger in thinking about encouragement is to think that it's just at times when people are discouraged that you encourage them. I want you to think of encouragement in a much bigger picture. Encouragement is creating an environment for our children that causes them to feel a positive, nurturing, safe thing. So it's not just dealing with a person when they're down, it's creating an environment 24/7 that is encouraging. Having talked about discouragement, let me just speak to that because it's very important to highlight it for people in recovery from complex trauma. Discouragement, most of us know exactly what it feels like. We don't feel inspired. We don't feel positive. We feel that what's happening right now is just too hard. There's no point in continuing. We don't feel we can make it. We don't understand why we should even try to make it. It's a time where we just want to give up. And what happens in those times of discouragement is it triggers a whole bunch of other things. It can trigger anxiety inside of us. What now? What's going on in my life? It can trigger confusion. I thought I was doing so well. Why is it not working out? It can trigger depression. All kinds of different negative things can get triggered with discouragement. But it's important to understand for people from complex trauma one thing that usually always gets triggered is a feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. And you can go from discouragement to hopelessness in a heartbeat. And that is because when a person has a lot of discouraging events as a child, every time they try to resolve them, they get their hopes up, but then they don't resolve them. And after a while, they go, there's no point. You can't resolve these difficult situations. It's hopeless. So now, the moment they feel discouragement, they just go to hopeless. There's no point in even trying to resolve it. And that is deadly for a person from complex trauma. So why is encouragement such an important thing? Let me give you a couple things. We saw a couple weeks ago that a child lives out of their limbic brain. That's the part that's developed. The cortex hasn't developed much yet. So the limbic brain is running the show. And the limbic brain needs a positive emotional environment to develop properly. It needs positive emotions. And so encouragement becomes absolutely essential for a child if they are to develop properly, because it keeps the limbic brain in a positive place. But there's another reason that we need encouragement. And I think every parent begins to realize this with children, and that is life can be very hard. And so think of it like a greenhouse. A child can go out and face the difficulties of life, the heartaches, the trials, the frustrations, but they need a home that's like a greenhouse, a home where they're safe, a home where the environment is warm and conducive to growing. It's nurturing. It's a positive environment. They need that environment in order to get strong enough to go out into the world. And when they're in the world for a while, they need that safe refuge to come back to get strengthened again. And so life is difficult. Let me give you some things just to quickly go through this. Every child goes through times of failure. Times where they set goals. Times where they are told to do stuff and then they don't. They fail. Somebody has said this: a word of encouragement during a failure is worth more than an hour of praise after success. And I would agree with that. It's in times of failure we need encouragement, because we just feel terrible and we might as well give up. Also, life is full of many struggles. Life isn't always easy. There's times where every step is a struggle. We need encouragement in those times. Life includes losses. Losses of people. Losses of important things in our life. Those are discouraging times, and we need encouragement in those times. Life means at times working very hard but seeing very few results. And you're putting so much effort in but seeming to get so little out of it that you get discouraged, and you need encouragement in those times. There's times even when you feel hopeless. You've tried to fix problems, you've tried to resolve situations, and nothing's working. And that is discouraging. Then there's times where you just feel shamed and you don't like yourself. You don't feel good about yourself, and that's discouraging. There's times when people point out your flaws more frequently than they point out your positive qualities. And then there's times when people are just downright critical of you. And it's not just significant people in your life. It can often be people that you hardly know, that you don't even respect, and they just are critical of you, and for some reason that really can affect you in a negative way and discourage you, and you need encouragement. And then you can have relationships that mean a lot to you, but there's just ongoing problems and conflict that you're not getting resolved, and that's discouraging. And then you can have people close to you that just oppose the direction you're going in your life. They can almost persecute you for choices that you are making that you know are healthy choices, but they don't like them. And that's discouraging. We struggle with depression. We struggle with times where there's just a lot of negative events. Things go wrong. Things fall apart. And we have more negative events than positive events. And that can take its toll. And then we can have a lot of difficult people in our life. We have people that just take all of our energy and don't give us anything back. And we have more negative people than we have positive people for stretches in our life. And that can be very discouraging. And so life is hard. And we need large doses of encouragement. Now let me take it a bit further to bring in complex trauma, because this becomes an even bigger issue for people with complex trauma for several reasons. People with complex trauma have not usually experienced this nice, safe, nurturing greenhouse where there's lots of encouragement and warmth and positive stuff. They have often experienced way more negative words than positive words, way more painful events than nurturing positive events. They've lived in homes where words have been very hurtful, not uplifting. That's been their norm, and that's a very sad thing. Another thing that can happen in complex trauma is, in order to stay safe, your brain is trained to look for danger, to look for negative. And so now when you go to parent yourself, your brain's trained to find all your flaws, not to find your positive things, not to notice your positive things. And so you can get really down on yourself because you just see your negative. Another aspect of complex trauma families often is shame-based parenting, where criticism outweighs praise, where you're made to feel you're not good enough, that you're a failure. And that's the constant environment that you grow up in. And then you can have very angry parents that lash out and they punish you in very hurtful, abusive ways. And that was your childhood. And then you grow up in complex trauma. Often there's very little validation. You don't get praise for your accomplishments or your good qualities. And when you're hurt, there's very little nurture. You're just told to get over it and quit being a suck. And there's very little connection. And connection is a very encouraging thing. And there's parents who aren't present to you, who are emotionally unavailable. And that's discouraging. And then you get your hopes up that maybe if I do this, my parents will love me, and your hopes get dashed over and over again. And then you have all this unresolved pain, unresolved unmet needs, unresolved injustice, unresolved anger inside of you. You can't resolve any of it. It's so discouraging. And then you have more losses than most. And then you have a lot of traumatic type events where you're beaten up, where you're scared to death because dad's waving a knife around. Trauma, trauma, trauma on top of trauma. And so you come to this place of hopelessness and helplessness. And that is so discouraging. So complex trauma families breed discouragement. They are the opposite of what a family should be as far as encouragement. And so people from complex trauma need even larger doses of encouragement when it comes to reparenting. They need to be aware of just how badly they need to create that positive environment for themselves that is nurturing and safe and supportive and loving. if they are going to make it in recovery. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about this encouragement as an environment. So it's not just speaking or doing things for somebody who's really discouraged. We got to think bigger than that, to the greenhouse. What kind of environment is an encouraging environment? Well, let's begin by thinking about non-encouraging environments. So I want you to start with 2 movies. Sound of Music. And there, if you've watched the movie, there's the naval officer who's the dad, and he blows the whistle, and the children all line up, and it's very disciplined, very cold, very austere. That's not a nurturing environment. And then another Disney movie is Mary Poppins, and Mary Poppins comes into this chaotic family where mom and dad are wrapped up in their own little worlds, and the children are not feeling connected. They're neglected, and they're having their own issues because of that. That's not a nurturing environment. You can probably think of families where you walk in and you feel the anger, or you feel parents that are always impatient with the kids. That's not encouraging. Or families where you just walk on eggshells all the time, not wanting to set mom or dad off. Everybody's on guard. That's not an encouraging environment. Or families where there's just this coldness, and you just feel everything is negative. Everything is critical. That's not encouraging. And then other families, there's just this perfectionistic standard, this parent who's a control freak over every little detail. That's not an encouraging environment. Or a family where nobody shares at an open, deeper, vulnerable level. Everything is just very superficial, matter of fact. That's not an encouraging environment. So what is an encouraging environment? Well, let me just make clear that an encouraging environment is created by the parents, by what they say and do. But it's only created if the parents say and do the right things consistently. It's not good enough to do the right things occasionally and the wrong things a lot. There has to be a very consistent environment created by parents. So basically, it requires healthy parents. And so what happens? What do they create? An environment where people view each other with respect and treat each other with respect. That's an encouraging environment. An environment where everybody can be patient with each other. We're human. We have limitations. We don't learn everything perfectly the first time. We do forget. We do blunder. And so we have patience. And then there's an interest in each other's lives. I want to know about you. I want to know what's going on in your life. And then there's a validation that takes place all the time to each member of the family. We validate what you do, who you are. There's empathy when you're hurting, when you're struggling. And then parents are present to the children. They're emotionally available when the child needs to connect. And then there's parents who have open hearts to each child, despite the child's struggles and failures and annoyances. The parent's heart is open. The parent is attuned to the children. They sense how a child is doing emotionally, physically, and they're attuned to that. And then parents who take time to get each child, to understand how they work, how they think, their emotional world, their dreams, their struggles. That is essential for an encouraging environment. And then you do things together. You have fun together. And then it's safe to admit within this family that you failed, that you're struggling. You're not punished for that. The parent is concerned that you're okay. The parent offers support. The parent helps you process the stuff that you're going through so that you learn from it. Children then feel loved according to their love language. So parents learn the love languages of each of the children and love them accordingly. And then it's a family where it's safe to disagree with the parents. Controversial topics can be safely discussed within this family. And each person is encouraged to be authentic. Uniqueness is valued. And then age-appropriate responsibilities are given to the children. So a small child is not asked to do something that is way beyond their abilities. Only what's appropriate to their skill set. All of those create an environment. That's what we have to create for ourselves. That's what we create for our children. That's what we create within our homes. Such an important thing to understand. Now, I want to get very specific here. I want to give you a couple examples. Examples that might stretch you, that might push you in your thinking, push you out of your comfort zone. But this is where kind of encouragement, where the rubber meets the road. So let me just say, first of all, a child comes home from school. What's an encouraging parent going to do? You're going to take an interest in your child's day. And as they share about their day, you're not giving them criticisms of stuff. You're listening. You're validating things that can be validated. You're not offering your opinion on everything if they've not asked for it. You're just there as this welcoming person who's going to validate. That's such an important thing. But let's say you notice your child seems to be depressed because they're not talking much, they're isolating in their room. What does an encouraging parent do? Well, they don't go into the child's room and say, "Get out. You need to be with people. Quit being such a suck. Quit being such a baby. Get over this. Cheer up." No, you're going to go in and go, "I notice you seem to be struggling, and I'm really sorry. If you want to talk about it, I'm available to talk. If you don't right now, that's fine. But just know that I do love you, and I do want to be available to talk. If you want to just come and watch a movie with me, I won't say a thing. You can just sit beside me, and we'll just watch a movie together, whatever you want to do. I'd be willing to do all that." So you meet them where they're at. You're not trying to fix them. You're opening the doors. You're creating a sense of empathy, willingness, compassion. Let me take you a bit further. Let's say your daughter comes home and says, "Mom, I'm pregnant." Please don't say, "What were you thinking?" Do you know what the neighbors are going to say or your grandparents are going to say when they find out? Do you know how it's going to make me look? Do you know what this is going to do to your dad? You're such a selfish slut. Please don't say those things. Those might be your initial impulse reactions, but put a lot of filters in place. What I would encourage you to say is, "Can I give you a hug? Thanks for letting me know. How are you doing with all of this?" Start there. And then after a while, you can go to them and say, "I want you to know that we will support you in whatever you decide to do with the baby. Have you decided what you want to do?" So usually you have three options. You can keep the baby, you can put the baby up for adoption, or you can get an abortion. If you want to talk about it, I'm happy to talk about it. But let's say then the child comes back a bit later and they go, I would like an abortion. Instead of just going, no way, you can't do that, and reacting to that, can I just make a suggestion? There are some people who really specialize in helping people thinking through the three options available to you. And what they've realized is that there's consequences to each of those three options that most don't think about when they first get pregnant. If you'd be willing to go and see somebody who can just help you in an unbiased way, think through the consequences of each option, then whatever you decide to do after that, we will support you. It is so important as your kids are getting older that you're not giving them your opinion unless they ask for it. You want to be supportive. You want to encourage them as they go through this very difficult time. Let me give you another example. Your child comes in and says, Dad, I'm gay. Please don't say, you are sinning. I can't have a sexual pervert in my house. I choose God over you. No, please say, I want you to know that that doesn't change my love for you one bit. Or you might even go so far to say, I fully accept who you are. I don't care about that. I would be interested in understanding and talking about what made you come to that conclusion, but I will not give a judgment on that. Let's say another example. Your daughter comes in and says, Mom, Dad, I was raped. Please don't say, how could you have been so careless? Or, I told you that you dress too seductively. It's your fault. Or, who did it? I'm going to go kill them. No, make your response, oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I can't think of anything worse that could happen to a woman. And just hug them. Just let them cry. Just be full of empathy and compassion. And then after a while, you can talk to them and say, it's going to take you a while to get over this. This is a trauma. And I want you to know that you can talk to me anytime, but if you would prefer to talk to a counselor, a specialist in this area, let me know. I'd be happy to pay for that so that you can get help to get through this, and you're probably going to need help. And then you might say to them, you know what? You're going to have to make a decision about whether or not you press charges. And I want you to know we're going to support you on whatever decision that you make. If you press charges, then you're going to have to go to court. And that means you're going to have to relive this event over and over again. It also means that you're going to have a defense lawyer who is going to try to make it your fault, who is going to look for anything negative about you and put it out there to the public. And they're going to try to make you into a monster. It's going to be a grueling thing. So I want you to understand that, but I also want you to understand that if you don't press charges, then that rapist thinks that they can go and do it again to somebody else. So both are going to be difficult, and we want you to know we're going to support you regardless of what decision you make. Encouragement sometimes pushes us out of our comfort zone. It pushes us to do stuff that can cause internal conflict, to support our children, support people who are in a very bad way. Now, I want to just speak to Encouragement when it comes to recovery. I want people to be aware of in recovery that if you have complex trauma, discouragement is a really dangerous place for you because you can go to hopelessness so quickly. And if you go to hopelessness, man, that can be deadly. That can lead to relapse, that can lead to suicide. And so it's so important to be aware of your early warning signs that discouragement is taking root inside of you. Be aware of your patterns. So look for signs of discouragement. You get more irritable. Anger is closer to the surface. Impatience is closer to the surface. Or you tend to isolate more. Or you start just feeling more overwhelmed with everything. Or you find yourself going into procrastinating, avoiding responsibilities. Could be signs of discouragement. Or you go to self-pity, just feeling sorry for yourself. Or you start to feel depression coming on. Or increased anxiety. Or I just want to shut down. Or I just want to quit. What's the point? Or you have a strong temptation to start to medicate or to escape the pain through distractions or medication. Or you begin to self-harm. All of those, be aware of those early signs of discouragement, because once you go to hopelessness, it's such a dangerous place. Finally, let me just say, how do we encourage ourselves and people? So there's main kind of avenues through which we can encourage people who are discouraged. So this is moving beyond the environment of encouragement to specific times when people are discouraged. How can we help them? So we can do it verbally, with encouraging words, telling them what we appreciate about them, telling them bigger picture stuff about what is happening in their life so they can get out of just that tunnel vision of seeing their problems. Or we can write them a note, often a card or a meaningful letter that just tells them that you're thinking of them, tells them why you value them so much, can be so encouraging. Or just validate that they're struggling. Say, man, you're going through a tough time. My heart goes out to you. Wow, I carry you on my heart because my heart is heavy as I watch you. That can be encouraging. Or do something that helps them, that lightens their load. Say, you know what? Let me take your kids for the evening so you can have a night just to relax. Or help them pay a bill, something that takes some pressure off. Or just be a good listener and let them vent some of their pain. Don't give them advice, just listen. Or buy them a gift that would just be meaningful and lift their spirits. Or a hug that just communicates through physical touch how much you care. Each person will be helped through different ways of encouragement. So it helps to know the person, to know what will be most meaningful to them. But can I say, don't shame people who are struggling. Don't disrespect them. That only adds to their struggle. Let's be people who encourage each other. Let's be people who learn to encourage ourselves, because we need it so much, especially as we live in difficult times in our culture today and difficult struggles in recovery. Well, that's the end of part one. We're going to take a short break, then I'm going to come back for part two, which is a Christian part. We know that many aren't interested in that, and that's okay with us. We're not offended. You're free to go. We'll see you next week. For everybody else, I'll be back in just a minute. Well, welcome back. I want to start a new Bible story series tonight, and it's going to begin with the story of a woman named Naomi, and it's going to grow into the story of Naomi and Ruth. And it's just, to me, such a beautiful story that is so encouraging. Naomi, we're going to see today, is a woman who became extremely discouraged because she lost everything. And her life parallels many of your lives because you've lost a lot. You've been in dark, dark places. So let me just give you the backdrop of this story. It says, in the days when the judges ruled in Israel, so before there were kings, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, which is to the southeast, taking his wife and 2 sons with him. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife was Naomi. Their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, and when they reached Moab, they settled there. So just let me say this. Bethlehem, the word actually means house of bread. And it was where Jesus was born, but it was a rich, fertile part of Israel. And it was where basically everybody was a farmer. So that's why it was the house of bread. They produced so much wheat, so many crops. And so it's very likely that Elimelech, who's a farmer, was fairly well off because they're in such a fertile area. But they're going through this devastating famine. And that's the backdrop of the story. And because of that, they have to go down to a nation who has food, which is Moab, southeast of Israel. So let me just highlight the losses. So the first loss is the famine. Here are these fairly well-off people who now there's no rain and their crops don't grow. Now it's important to understand you don't experience the results of a famine in the first year necessarily. It's if the famine continues into the second year. Well, in the second year, you're starting to dig into your savings. You're starting to use up all your resources. But you go, maybe we should hang on because maybe it's going to rain next year. And then the famine goes into the third year. And now you're all out of resources and now you have no food. And it is a long, prolonged torture. And you can imagine the stress of watching all of your money, your savings, gradually disappear and there's still no rain. And it would be extra difficult as a mother with 2 small boys as you watch them begin to have to eat less and go hungry. And then you have to sell everything and decide to move. So now you go to a foreign country, you leave your friends behind. You leave all your supports behind. You leave your home. You're now poor. Loss after loss after loss. And then you go to this foreign country, and Moab and Israel didn't get along very well. And so the people of Moab wouldn't be very happy to have all of these immigrants coming in looking for food and a job. And so Naomi and her husband, they would experience racism. They would experience some persecution, hostility. And life would have been very, very hard as they just tried to get enough to support their little family. Another loss. But then Elimelech gets sick and dies. It says Elimelech died and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah and the other married a woman named Ruth. Now, it's important to understand in that culture is that women didn't get jobs and didn't provide for families. They stayed at home with the kids. So for Elimelech to die, he was their only source of income. And so for him to be gone now, Naomi is destitute. The boys are probably too little to go get jobs, so what is she going to do now to get food on the table? It would have been so difficult. So life got hard with the famine. Then it got harder when they had to move to Moab. Now it's even harder living in Moab without a husband and boys. Well, the boys get a bit older and get married. They're able to provide. Things are looking up. And then both boys get sick and die. It's heartbreaking. Every person she has loved dearly is now dead. And she is left with the two daughter-in-laws. They are now looking to her for guidance, for help, because they can't get jobs either. So now you have three women without any source of income, and it is very difficult. So you just see this Naomi going from this very prosperous, plentiful, wonderful life with a husband and two boys in a wonderful business, and then beginning to lose everything. Losing the business, losing wealth, losing their country, going to a foreign country, losing husband, losing boys, destitute. Here's Naomi's response. She says, "Don't call me Naomi." And Naomi means pleasant. She says, instead, "Call me Mara." And Mara means bitter. She says, "Because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty." So what she's saying is, I left Bethlehem. My life had been so full. Now it is empty. Everything is gone. Why call me pleasant when the Lord has caused me to suffer and the Almighty has sent such tragedy upon me? You notice who her bitterness is with? It's God. God, you sent these tragedies. She's angry at God. She's bitter against God. Why? Why have you taken everything from me? What have I done to deserve this? Why are you mad at me? In her mind are the questions that she is asking. And I just want to leave this story there for today, because for many of you, you've kind of been there. It's like everything that was important and valuable to you has been taken away. And you have gone from feeling like you had a fairly full life to being totally empty. And you became bitter, angry at God, angry at the world, angry at everybody else. And what we're going to see with Naomi is she just became this prickly porcupine. Didn't want anybody showing her kindness, didn't want anybody showing her love. She was just miserable and wanted to stay that way. But what we're going to see over the next few weeks is what God does to begin to encourage her again. But what God also does to fill her back up again. She was emptied, but she is going to become full again. And that's the beautiful story of Naomi. Let's pray. Father, I just pray that you would use this story to encourage people, to help us realize that life at times can be so confusing and so difficult. We can have times of bitterness, times of anger towards you, but you are always gracious and loving, and you just work to encourage us where we're at. And I pray that you would bring healing to people. Amen. Well, thank you again for being with us. Hope it's been helpful.